This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth. Today is Monday, April the 16th, 2018, and we have a very important show lined up for you. So let's just jump right into it. Joining me on the line right now is Kevork Almassian, a Syrian man who was born in Aleppo, Syria, born and raised, so he knows all too well the intricacies of this proxy war that's being kicked into overdrive as of late. So Kevork, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here today at Press for Truth.
Thank you very much for hosting me. It's my pleasure.
Now, there's so many things to cover here in regards to what's going on over there. And I want to talk about the investigation, obviously the alleged chemical attack. But before we get into that, maybe you can break it down for us a little bit about this propaganda campaign we seem to be seeing here in the West, orchestrated by the mainstream media, that seems to be trying to convince everyone that Assad chemically attacked his own people. This comes despite the fact that he's been winning the war against ISIS. You know, Donald Trump recently announced that they would be withdrawing troops from Syria. And so all of a sudden, he decides to gas his own people. It makes absolutely no sense. So what can you tell us about this current propaganda spin campaign that's being orchestrated against people here in the West?
Unfortunately, the vast majority of the Western mainstream media are not only portraying the Syrian army as criminal who is going from town to town and killing kids and children and elderly and also cats and destroying cat sanctuaries, but also as stupid. They are trying to convince the people that when the Syrian army was on the verge of a victory against Jaish al-Islam, which is in English called Islam's army, a Salafist radical group, which was in control of only 10% of Eastern Ghouta. The Syrian army chose this timing when there was a negotiation between the Syrian government and Jaish al-Islam through the Russian mediator, where the Russians had guarantees from Jaish al-Islam that they will withdraw to north of Syria. So it was only a matter of a few hours when these militants were going to leave Eastern Ghouta or Douma into the northern part of Syria. And only at this particular time, the Syrian government, according to the Western mainstream media, has chosen to use chemical weapons against these militants, killing 70 civilians. So just check the narrative here. The Syrian army is using weapons of mass destruction to kill 70 civilians, whereas the fact is the Syrian army is able to use its warplanes, able to use its tanks, able to use its ground soldiers, and a lot of kinds of artilleries in order to kick out these militants from this area. So in a sense, even if the Syrian army used chemical weapons in this area, it has no military value or military consequences, positive consequences for that. And the same narrative has been used last year when the mainstream media said that the Syrian government used chemical weapons in Khan Sheikhoun area, which is when the Syrian army was advancing in north of Hama. The narrative was similar. The Americans came and bombed a Sharat airbase, and then they said we bombed the chemical capabilities of the Syrian army in this airbase. So if we think it logically, if there was any kind of chemical materials in a Sharat airbase at that time last year, there would be a widespread of chemical gas in the surroundings of the airbase, and thousands of people would dead and perish because due to this bombardment. And that was not the case. There was no chemical material. The same thing now this year, the Americans claim that they bombed al-Barza Research Center, which is a medical and scientific research center for even cancer treatments. And they bombed this research center, saying that they curbed the capability of the Syrian army to launch more chemical attacks. So if this was the case, and there was also chemical materials in that particular place, first of all, the Americans and the British, they shouldn't have bombed these areas, because 6 to 7 million ordinary civilians were targeted to gas, if there was any kind of gas in that place. And secondly, nothing happened. So there was no gas in that place. But the thing is that your respectable audience, we should remind ourselves and them as well that in 2013 there was an agreement between the Syrian government and the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, to dismantle and destroy all kinds of chemical weapons that Syria had in the past. These weapons were for deterrence against the Israeli invasion, if there was any case of invasion of Syria, because Israelis have nuclear weapons. This was only for deterrence, and Syria never used this kind of weapons before, and not even now. So the weapons were destroyed under the supervision of the OPCW, and even on some of the American their war marines in the Mediterranean, and the Americans, including John Kerry, they said Syria has no more chemical weapons now, and but unfortunately, until this time, such a provocation is happening because this is a red line for the Americans or the Western governments. In order, if these militants do such a provocation, they know that the Americans will come and bomb the Syrian government, and not ISIS, not Al Qaeda, and not any other affiliated groups who are cooperating between each other in Syria.
Yeah, well, we know that the OPCW was announcing that they had plans to go into Syria to investigate this alleged chemical attack, and right on cue, within hours, the U.S., UK, France, and their allies decided to go ahead and launch this attack. This just was released 2 days ago from the OPCW, from The Hague, Netherlands. They say the fact-finding mission, FFM, team of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will continue its deployment to the Syrian Arab Republic to establish facts around the allegations of chemical weapons use in Douma. The OPCW has been working in close collaboration with the United Nations Department of Safety and Security to assess the situation and ensure the safety of the team. So it seems that this investigation may potentially be continuing. Are you aware of that? Is this indeed the case, that they're still going to try to get to the bottom, at post-attack, get to the bottom of what actually happened there?
The Syrian government called the OPCW investigators to come to Syria and investigate this alleged use of chemical weapons. It was the Syrian government who called for the OPCW experts to come to Damascus, and they arrived to the capital a few hours before the American campaign, the military campaign and aggression against Damascus. So the Americans, the British, and the French, they didn't wait for the investigation. Now, if we check the reports, what we are reading right now while we are speaking, the British and the French and the Americans are accusing Russia of not allowing the OPCW experts to go to Douma, where the fact is, I was just doing my calls to Damascus to my friends who work as journalists and also people who are facilitating the work of the OPCW in Syria. The fact is, the OPCW experts are refusing to go to Douma because they are claiming that they need an initial approval from or mandate from the UN Security Council, where the fact is, in 2013, the Syrian government and the OPCW, they had initial agreement between each other. So anytime the Syrian government wants the OPCW to come to Syria and investigate of alleged use of chemical weapons, the Syrian government can do that without mandate from the UN Security Council. This is a mutual agreement between the OPCW and Damascus government. Now, when the experts arrived to Syria, now they are not going to Douma. They are saying we want a UN Security Council mandate while they arrived to already in Damascus. And the fact is, 2 days ago, the Russians called for the OPCW to go to Syria, and also called for example, because the Americans did an act of aggression, let's do in the UN Security Council a meeting in order to denounce the American act. The Americans used veto. They didn't allow it. So now the OPCW experts are in Damascus. The Syrian government is telling them, please go to Douma and investigate that. And the investigators are not going. They are telling that we need now the mandate from the UN Security Council. If we go to the UN Security Council, it will be very disastrous situation, because in my opinion, if the Russians told the UN Security Council, okay guys, let's give a mandate for them, and if the Americans vetoed this time, this will be a scandal. This will be a worldwide scandal, because the Russian investigators, the Iranian, the Syrian investigators, they were in the chemical place without masks, without anything, because there was no chemical attack in that place. Then everybody is telling even the victims who went out, they are talking to the Syrian media. They're saying that we were a victim of a bombardment on one of the roofs of a building, and then there was a huge fire. And because we sneezed all this fire, we felt dizzy, and all of a sudden, the white helmets, the humanitarian wing of the Al-Qaeda, they came in and they said, it's a chemical attack here. And everybody get panicked and starting to shower themselves with water. And come on, if there was a Syrian attack, do you think water could help them to treat for such kind of an attack? We've seen such footage in Khan Sheikhoun last year, where the white helmets were the ones who collected the so-called sarin materials in Khan Sheikhoun last year. And while they were collecting the materials, people walking just next to this location with barefoot, without wearing anything, or without gloves, without anything. Do you think chlorine gas or sarin gas is a joke? It's not it's a very dangerous gas, and even by touching it, you can be infected. And none of them were infected, neither the white helmets nor the people who were working there. And at that time, let's remind our respectable audience that the OPCW, they contradicted their own charter, because they are not allowed to get samples from third party. And the white helmets were the ones who took these samples from Al-Qaeda held area at that time. They relied on a third party. They relied on testimonies of a doctor called Islam Shakur or something. And he is a convicted terrorist in Britain. And he is a doctor, but his certificate is being withdrawn by the British government for accusations of terrorism. But his statements or his saying had been used in the OPCW report, and they didn't go to Khan Sheikhoun. The OPCW said, we are not able to go to Khan Sheikhoun because, one, it's an Al-Qaeda held area, although Turkey, if they want, they can facilitate everything because they are very friends with Al-Qaeda in that area. And secondly, they said they lack $400. This is not a joke. They said the budget lacks $400 to go to Syria and investigate on the ground what happened in Khan Sheikhoun. And their report last year was released on Twitter by certain journalists. I read the OPCW report on Twitter before they released it 1 week later. So there was no privacy. They didn't follow the charter, the basic rules of investigation. They relied on the white helmets. The white helmets, their agenda is a regime change in Syria. So they are not reliable. You cannot rely on these people to gather any kind of sample in Syria.
Yeah, unbelievable manipulation going on. As you said, these children that were being shown here in the news were suffering from smoke inhalation. You know, it was suffocation from smoke inhalation, and the news is trying to say, oh, look, this is evidence of a chemical attack because their family members are spraying water on them. You mentioned the white helmets, and I think it's important for our audience here, if they've never seen this before, I want to just briefly play a quick clip here of the white helmets staging events so that to make it look like they are rescuing people, just so people have an understanding of the extent to this propaganda spin campaign. Here's a clip of the white helmets staging a rescue.
Wait. Wait. On your marks, get set, go!
So clearly, the manipulative techniques here are astounding, and people are buying it hook, line, and sinker here in the West. Now, obviously, this is geared towards an eventual plan for regime change. And I'm wondering if you're aware of some of the CIA's involvement in funding and training and building up these Al-Qaeda rebels, eventually, groups such as ISIS. What sort of info or intel do you have into the involvement of the CIA in these groups that are really leading the charge here?
My friend, we all know that there are classified documents by the CIA that after some years, they are released for public, so everybody can read it. Now, in 2012, there was a document leaked from the CIA, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it has been put on the desk of Barack Obama in 2012, and they were telling Barack Obama that the radical Salafists in eastern Syria were the active force behind the anti-Assad movement in Syria. And at that time, Barack Obama and his administration, they thought that this is a good idea to have an Islamic Emirates in eastern part of Syria and try to encircle the government of President Assad in order to get concessions. So their purpose was the first 2 years was concessions from President Assad, and then things went out of control because these Salafis, they developed into Al-Qaeda, Al-ISIS. ISIS was basically in Iraq. And then they moved to Syria, and they were fractions between Al Qaeda. Some became ISIS, others remain Al Qaeda, but they have the same ideology. In all cases, these groups were having weapons, ammunition, financial support, not directly by the United States, but they call it the arming and supporting the moderate rebels. So this was the mask, or they were hiding behind this program by saying that we are supporting moderate rebels who are secular, who want democracy and human rights in Syria. Whereas the fact is, as a Syrian and as a monitor for the Syrian situation, until this moment, I couldn't find these moderate rebels in Syria. They called it Free Syrian Army, and the Free Syrian Army was very few in numbers, and most of them joined Al-Qaeda or other Islamist groups because they were better armed, financed, and they had a stronger ideology. So by supporting these moderate rebels, and the money and the support was going through the Free Syrian Army to these radical armed groups. So this was the case, and there are groups on Facebook. There are what was the name? There are applications that these people are selling the American weapons that they receive, but with the boxes they are ready. They are selling them to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And even we have to remind ourselves also what the former foreign minister of Qatar only in December 2017 said on a Qatari TV, that when the things started to develop in Syria in 2011, the Americans sent a letter to Qatar that you have to lead this in Syria. And then they built a camp in Turkey. There were American soldiers or generals, Qatari generals, Saudi generals, and American generals. And he said that we were sending arms and ammunition to these people from day one. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the guy who was responsible for that, and he is telling it in media, in public now, because he's out of the office. Because, everyone goes out of the office, they can't speak. When they are in office, they don't speak. And he said literally that maybe we did a mistake by arming al-Nusra Front. Maybe. He said we did a mistake by arming al-Nusra. That means even the Americans knew that Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they were arming and financing Al-Qaeda. Al-Nusra is Al-Qaeda's franchise in Syria. This is no more something hidden for public. Everybody can go to the alternative media, to social media, to activists, to Syrians who are witnessing all this horror for 7 years. They can ask them what's going on in Syria. And unfortunately, after 7 years, people like myself, for example, we don't have strong platforms to deliver our messages. So we thank you for having also such platforms and giving us a voice so we can speak to the Western audiences, because otherwise I will give you only without naming. I've been interviewed by many mainstream media outlets, but only one time. The first time they interview you, they see that you have a logic, you have solid arguments, you have documents. The second time, they don't host you. They host pro-government side, but they host the people who are not able to argue. You know what I mean? It's true that they bring them, but they bring the people who are not well skilled or they are not able to argue well in a debate, for example. So they can portray that the pro-government side is they don't have the logic, they don't have the argument, and the other side is always a stronger side. That's why I decided to open my own channel, Syriana Analysis, on YouTube, so that I don't need for any mainstream media outlet to call me so that I speak to the audience. I can build up my own audience, and I can speak to my audiences in the way I want.
Well, that's fantastic, and that's precisely why I wanted to have you on. It is so incredibly important that we do everything we can to counter this propaganda and to let the people of the world know what's truly going on there, especially from the Syrian perspective. I mean, lives are literally at stake here. So, I think that's a great move on your behalf to have a YouTube channel to be able to spread this information. I certainly want to continue to have you on moving forward in the future as this continues to develop. So, we'll get the links in the description below so everybody can follow your work. But what are some of the things you would like people to take away from this today? I mean, as I said, a lot of people are under the impression here in the West that Assad gassed his own people, even though that makes absolutely no sense. And who are some of the people we should be actually pointing the finger of blame at? Does this come down to the U.S. and their Israeli and other allies, Saudi Arabia, Turkey? Where should the blame be focused on?
In 2011, when there was protests in Syria, I was one of the people who was enthusiastic. We have to be very honest with our audiences. I was enthusiastic because there were many mistakes on the domestic level in Syria. There is no state which is perfect, and I am myself. I'm leftist, but also I believe in democracy. So in Syria, we wanted more, for example, political freedom. We wanted more participation in the parliament. We wanted more participation by the youngsters because I studied international relations and diplomacy and I was doing master in political science. So my future, I wanted to build a better political atmosphere in Syria. This was my initial goal. But it didn't take much time. After a couple of weeks, we have seen Hillary Clinton and many other Western leaders. They're saying Assad must go, Assad lost legitimacy, and it started to change this. They started to rub this domestic demands from the people and try to portray it as a popular revolution against the regime that we want to overthrow President Assad. Although at that time, Assad, he proposed a lot of, let's say, political reforms, and I supported that political reforms. And until this moment, I still practice pressure, for example, on the Syrian government through social media, through my posts and publications. For the Syrian people, for example, we need more reforms in the constitution. This is something for the Syrians to choose, not for the Americans, neither for the British to choose who will lead our government. But because they armed and financed these radical jihadists in Syria, and only it was after 3 weeks, massacres started in Syria. 120 Syrian soldiers been beheaded in just in June 2011. A lot of incidents the motive was behind it was the sectarian radicalism. They started to kill people on their sectarian ID. And for example, there was this famous chant during this protest. They were saying the Alawites to the coffins and the Christians to Beirut, meaning they will slaughter the Alawites and they will send the Christians to Beirut. This is a genocidal slogan. None of the mainstream media was shedding light on this. So the people understood that this is no more about democracy, it's no more about human rights, and it's no more about domestic issues. It's about the imperialist governments trying to destabilize Syria and to remove Assad, not because of his internal mistakes, not because of his domestic mistakes, but because of his good things that he has done on the external level. Assad has all this popularity in Syria thanks to his foreign policies. And the American administrations or the British or the French, they are targeting Assad because of his foreign policy, not because of his domestic mistakes. So for a moment, someone like me who wants reforms in Syria, but at the same time, he knows that if Assad is gone, they will install a Western puppet, just like in Saudi Arabia or Qatar or elsewhere. I will stand with President Assad to the end. Even though I have reservations on his domestic policies, I will stand by him and by the Syrian army who is fighting all these Islamic jihadists in Syria, because if he is gone, the alternative is this radical Islamist who will take back Syria into the 6th century, not even in the 19th or the 20th century. Syria was and should stay a secular country because we have over 20 different communities, different ethnicities, religious sects, etc. And we have women rights in Syria. The vice president of Syria is a woman. The advisor of the president is a woman. We want to empower more, not to take their rights back. So if these people came to power, they will oppress the religious minorities, they will oppress women, just like they're doing in, for example, take a look to Idlib. This is the last city that is fully under the control of these so-called moderate rebels. What's the position of women in Idlib? They are forced to wear burqas. They've been lynched in the streets for not wearing burqas. They've been stoned to death, accused of adultery or anything else. People, for example, homosexuals, being thrown from the balconies, killing them. These are the moderate rebels in Syria. Whereas in Damascus or any other government-held areas, all these different Syrians are living peacefully, even the homosexuals. This is important because in Syria, socially, they are not accepted. But the government, they never touch them. They don't harm anybody. They just let people practice. If you are a Christian, you practice your Christianity in the church. If you are a Jew, you practice it in your church. If you are Muslim, in your mosque. But if you want to impose your way of life on other people, sorry, we have to fight these people because they want to exterminate the Syrian identity and replace it with an Islamist identity, and this is a red line for us.
Yeah, and I want the audience to be very clear. We're not saying here that Assad is some sort of bastion of light here. Every nation has their own problems that they have to deal with, but what they do want to do is take him out in order to install a more westernized, moldable, palatable, shapeable leader who they can then control. So what are some of the good things that Assad is doing? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they are not taking on debt from the IMF. They're not even they've been against things like GMO seed and things of that nature. And these are things that go directly against what the oligarchy, the Westerners are trying to impose on the world. So what other problems do they foresee of him as being? I believe they don't even have a centralized bank owned by the Rothschilds. Is that the focus here, is to get rid of him so that they can do those things?
Exactly. A lot of things were developing in Syria before the war. One of the most important things was the economic growth. It was 4% growth in GDP in 2011. The education was free in Syria, both in elementary, secondary, and in universities. People can become doctors, engineers, and very good education, not cheap education. The medical care, if you want to go to governmental hospitals and governmental doctors, they are free. So the middle class and the people below the middle class, they had the state who was backing them. all this time. And this was a very good thing for everybody. I studied in a private university, but my brother, he became a very successful engineer thanks to the free education in Syria, for example. We didn't take any loans from the IMF or the World Bank. Our banks were Syrian. We didn't borrow our banks to outside the financiers. The foreign investors, when they wanted to come to Syria and invest, for example, in anything, one of the conditions was the workers should be Syrians. And this was one of the best things that happened. You are a French investor and you're coming to invest in a brand in Syria, that's fine. You can do your business here, but the workers should be Syrians. Because we have a new generation of well-educated students. They have been graduated from both governmental and private universities, and they need positions for them. The other things that were very good in Syria was this. The environment of harmony that the government created for different religious sects and communities, ethnicities in Syria, that there was no, let's say, fights or any kind of conflict between these communities. And most importantly, on the foreign policy level, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, he refused the war on Iraq in 2003, and he supports the Palestinian cause. He supports the Palestinian resistance. He supports the Lebanese resistance, and most importantly, he refused the gas pipelines that the Qataris and the Saudis wanted to extend from the Syrian territories into Turkey and then from Turkey to Europe. Because by doing so, it's true that we were going to make a lot of money from it, but on a strategic level, Assad thinks in a geopolitical manner, and he knows that by doing so, he will hit his strategic partner, which is Russia. So Qataris and the Saudis were trying to destabilize the economy of Russia through extending these gas pipelines to Europe, an area that the majority of the gas is coming from Russia. So Assad said no for this plan. And then all these governments weighed in and they started to target Assad for his good things that he have done in the last couple of years. And we were happy for that. For example, after 2006, after the war between Hezbollah and Israel, we all know that the Syrian army opened all its depots for Hezbollah to use all kinds of weapons from Syria to resist a foreign occupier. And now the same thing happened in Syria. More than 80 nationalities came to fight the Syrian government, the Syrian army. The Syrian army is not Assad's army. Assad doesn't have a clan for 200,000 people fighting for him. All men in Syria serve in the army, and there is no family whose sons and brothers didn't serve in the army. Even my father served in the army. So everybody serves in the army in Syria. We are the Syrian people who are serving in the army, not Assad's army. But in a way, I was trying to say that they sent all these multinational jihadists to Syria through Turkey, over 80 nationalities, and they created all this mayhem in Syria. And now there is a direct occupation by the Americans occupying East Syria in the eastern shores of the Euphrates. They have over 2,000 soldiers, also protected by the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, mainly led by the YPG, the Kurds. And they are taking away our oil resources. It's like the Americans, as if they are sending a message to the Syrians that we know you are winning the war, but we know as well that if you want to reconstruct your country, you will need these gas fields in the eastern parts of the Euphrates. So you have two conditions. You either make compromises for us, so we give you back these gas oil fields, or we deprive you from this gas, the incomes of this gas oil field, so you cannot rebuild it again. Then you will go to the IMF or the World Bank to get loans from that. But as long as Assad is in power, in my opinion, he won't take any loans from the IMF or the World Bank. He will rely more on the Russian investment bank, the Indians, the Chinese, as I mentioned, the Russians, the Iranians, the people who stood next to us, not the people who fought us. We're not going to take money from the Americans. The Americans, if they give you one carrot, they say, but you have to do something else. And this is not the character of the Syrians. If you want to understand Syria, you have to understand the Syrians. Syrians are proud people. and they won't kneel in front of anybody to get a carrot. They prefer to die in hunger and not to get such money and be in and have a debt to the Americans for billions of dollars for years and years and years to come in the next generation. This is impossible for us.
Well, this is precisely why they are currently the enemy of the West in their eyes, and why we're seeing their modus operandi of order out of chaos. It goes back to your classic problem, reaction, solution type of manipulation technique, where if you want something that you know the world's not going to go for, you generate that problem, you create the problem in order to generate that reaction so that you can offer the solution to this very problem that you created. And they've upped their game now to no problem, reaction, solution. Now it's just important that the perception of a problem is in the minds of the masses in order for them to go in there, as you said, for more reasons than just not using the centralized Rothschild bank, not using the IMF, but oil and gas reserves as well. As we know, there's pipelines they're trying to divert through the Golan Heights by these companies that are owned by guys on the advisory board are guys like James Woolsey and Jacob Rothschild and Dick Cheney. I mean, a former of Halliburton. So clearly, they are manipulating the situation to get in there for a whole host of various reasons, and that's why it's important that we continue to counter this propaganda. So I want to thank you once again for joining us today. Any final thoughts on what you want the people to come take home with this interview, and also give us out the links to your YouTube channel so that people can subscribe.
Of course, I just want to tell your respectable audiences, I'm sure they are one of the people who engage their brains when they think, but those who are new and start watching your videos new or my videos new, please engage your brain and logic what's going on in Syria. And it's very easy to find the truth from all this propaganda that's been fed all these years in Syria. I don't blame them if in 2011, 12, 13, they were misled, because we Syrians, we were misled by what's going on in Syria. But in 2018, we are in the first half of the 2018. They have a lot of platforms, a lot of alternative ways to have an information. Now there are many Western journalists in Syria. They're covering there. I'm not telling them to listen only to the Syrians, but there are many Western journalists there now in Syria. They're reporting the truth from underground and also engage with the Syrians. There are many pages on Facebook in English that people speak. We Syrians, we speak English, so you can engage with us. You can ask us what's going on in Syria. And please, before listening to anybody, try to get what's the background of this guy. If he is from the White Helmet, if he is a sympathizer of Islam's army, if he is a sympathizer of Al-Qaeda, because in the outlook, they might look just like me and you, but from inside, they might hold these radical ideologies, and they want to. They are cheering and applauding all these radical groups in Syria. So it's easy for them to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And also, I would like to thank you for hosting me and giving me this platform to spread the word, the Syrian word. And if they want to follow my work, they can. I will post it when you post your video. I will put it in the comments below. It's called Syriana analysis. I will also put the links in the comment so they can follow all the works that I do in the Syrian fight.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly will have all the links located in the description below. Once again, I want to thank you for your courage and for, doing the work that so importantly needs to be done. We hope to have you on again sometime soon. So once again, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.